dang old complicated, you know, man. Like a dang old Rubik's Cube, man. You like talking about blue, red, man, then you get to one side and like messed up.
All right, Thomas, welcome back to the Jay Burden Show. How you doing?
I'm very well. Thanks for hosting me again.
Yeah, definitely. I'm glad to have you back on. So obviously there are a few things that I think most people know about you. You know, your revisionist stuff, you know, where you're from. And I've talked to you a little bit about, you know, historical revisionism, sci-fi, but I really do want to talk to you about Chicago politics. And if I can be permitted a digression, every once in a while I get kind of obsessed with a political figure. You know, normally someone who's kind of odd or weird just because they're interesting to me. And recently I went on a deep dive on Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot. And if anyone at home hasn't seen what this woman looks like, she looks like a sci-fi monster. She's a homunculus that has somehow managed to be, you know, the mayor of Chicago.
To be charitable, she's an unfortunate looking woman. Let me leave it at that. Yeah.
And it's not only the looks on her, because there are a lot of politicians that you wouldn't exactly consider lookers. There seems to be almost no redeeming fact about her. You know, she's not charismatic. She's not particularly effective. And look, I realize that if you're expecting every politician to be these august statesmen, you know, you're going to be sincerely disappointed. But she is kind of outside the bounds of normal politicians. You know, she's just a very odd woman. And so I'm curious, could you explain, you know, where she came from and why she's in that position of power?
Well, the thing about, you know, whatever, I don't have anything nice to say about the man, Rahm Emanuel, like at all. And anybody who knows my politics and knows about Rahm, I mean, they understand that. So I shouldn't have to qualify my take on the man with that. But I know that if I don't qualify, people are going to assume like goofy stuff, and people who aren't on the ground or don't really understand kind of the true depth of the rot in terms of public corruption. But in my lifetime, Rahm was by far the best mayor Chicago had. Okay. And there's a reason why he was deployed here. You know, Rahm, even before he became Mr. Obama's chief of staff or whatever his official role was. I mean, he was his hatchet man, but his official role was chief of staff, if I recall correctly. Okay. Before that, Rahm was very much a somebody in Washington circles. Okay, and he's got strong ties to the state of Israel and Likud and IPAC. I mean, it's a fact. I'm not, you know, putting shade on his ethnicity or speculating. His brother wasn't as a very, very wealthy hedge fund manager and like venture capitalist type. You know, Rahm was very much a Washington insider. I mean, he's from the North Shore, but he, you know, for him to go from being this kind of Washington fixer and hatchet man to being the mayor of Chicago, I mean, that's weird. Okay, and it was very clear that Rahm was deployed here essentially to try to fix what the machine had done, and the Department of Justice was sending a message, as well, with the man that they assigned as head prosecutor, Fitzpatrick. My short-term memory fails me sometimes. I believe it's Fitzpatrick. In any event, the regime was, Washington was basically saying enough is enough. Okay, with what goes on in Chicago, particularly because Obama is not at all from Chicago, so it irritates the hell out of me when people pretend he is. He's some random guy from Hawaii, and you don't know anything about this town if you think you can just show up here and be from here. It does not work like that. But you know,
one of the things that I've found kind of fascinating about Obama, because I was born in '99, so kind of my early, you know, awareness is the Bush era. But the first big kind of political event I remember that really mattered was that 2008 Obama election, right? And I was still young in it. But
your civic memory starts around there. You're like 8, 9, 10. So yeah.
Well, I mean, he is a weird figure, and
Totally.
I think that there's a lot of it kind of got overshadowed by kind of retarded baby boomer takes about him. Like, oh, his middle name is Hussein. He's related to Saddam. Like, just dumb stuff like that. But he doesn't really.
Like I said, yeah.
He's
Like
a
I said,
weird guy.
well, and it's like I said before. I mean, in our conversation elsewhere, if they were going to present Obama as kind of this, you know, immigrant made good, you know, and non-white guy, well, wasn't he great? Like, I understand that. it was really, really weird to pretend that he's like from the black community, because he's not. That's not me like being insulting or diminishing him. He's just literally not. Any more than like Rod Blagojevich is like a poor Appalachian coal miner's son. You know, so it was weird that they kind of tried to mythologize him as like this black guy from Chicago. And black folk here did not like the guy. You know, and he got treated when he ran against Bobby Rush. You know, who you know, speaking of the machine, you know, he was a guy who was very insinuated into that, like Rush was. But in any event, you know, the antics with Blagojevich literally trying to pawn off Obama's Senate seat, you know, and he was quite literally on them tapes saying like, I gotta fucking get paid. You know, Blagojevich was. I mean, before it was in anticipation of that kind of garbage. I mean, I think Washington was looking for the right man, you know, to insinuate into the mayor's office, you know, when the Daley regime, you know, finally ended, either because Richie Daley himself was too compromised mentally, or, you know, owing to scandal or something. But the point is, like, Rahm was sent to Chicago for that purpose, okay? And it's very, you know, Rahm now is our ambassador to Japan. That's a plum freaking role, okay? He was very much rewarded for taking this job nobody wants, which is mayor of Chicago, okay? What's weird about it, though, and I've got my own take on this, which probably sounds conspiratorial, when Rahm left office, there was absolutely no succession plan. And what's left of the machine, they refused to run in anybody, okay? Because the Fraternal Order of Police hated Bill Daley, you know, who was the remaining Daley son, who himself was something of a Washington insider. He worked on Al Gore's campaign, and then he went to Wall Street. Bill Daley was an alma mater of my law school was his alma mater. So like I always heard about how great the freaking guy was, like when I was in law school. But the Fraternal Order of Police, and other than outside of Chicago, like Boston and Philly, the idea of a police union having massive power doesn't make any sense. Like people in New York or Los Angeles would be like, "What are you talking about?" But the Fraternal Order of Police in Chicago has massive power, and if you alienate them, you're not going to be the mayor. Okay, basically. All right. But Lightfoot got elected because literally nobody went to vote. So it's like she was this kind of random lady on a random slate of candidates that didn't really make any sense. And by true, like, splendid accident, like, this Lightfoot lady got elected because nobody showed up to vote. And my view of that is this. The Chicago machine, especially when Edward Burke, who's kind of like the de facto boss of the machine, if you want to look at it that way, when it became clear he was going to be indicted, you know, at least so he thought, I think the machine said, "Look, we're gonna go for the Sampson option. You know, we're gonna let the city totally go to hell. You know, we're gonna stand by while it burns. You know, and we're gonna let it burn, and we're gonna keep letting it burn, you know, until Washington gets off our ass." And that's what's going on right now. And that's why, I mean, the police hate Lightfoot for their own reasons, but I'm not making this up. During the BLM garbage and when people were trashing the Mag Mile, Chicago PD was letting it happen. Okay, and Chicago police are never overwhelmed, man. They're bad dudes, and they come heavy. You know, and they're standing with their arms crossed, like looking hard while guys are like smashing out the freaking window of the Nike store. They're letting that happen. Okay, and they're letting it happen because a news crew's there and they want everyone to see it happening. So that's what's going on right now. So you've got this situation now where there's no real mayor. Lightfoot's this like literally mentally ill lady who's like always looks kind of terrified, like a scared rabbit or something. Like the police openly state that like they will not like obey her orders or edicts. The cops have started treating like the dope spots, like in the, you know, you ever see this show The Wire where Baltimore PD just gets fed up and they just tell all the hoppers like, look, you know, you can push dope, you can sell your beefs, you can even throw shots at one another, but you're going to contain it to like these like 3 square blocks. That's what Chicago PD is doing now, okay? And unless somebody's like opening fire like on a busy street or something in the ghetto, like they're not doing anything. You know, you can like openly sling dope now, like so I'm told. Okay, I don't cruise dope spots anymore, but I do like have one ear to the street, as it were. And Chicago PD is like basically cultivating anarchy because they themselves are a gang. I'm not bashing the police. Okay, if you know the politics here, you understand what I mean. Okay, so don't jump in the comments section. So you want me to die because I said mean stuff about the police. I'm not saying that, but that's the way I read it. So one of a few things is going to happen. There's either going to be like some like new guy who's probably going to be Hispanic, just frankly, who like the machine is groomed, but there's plausible deniability that like he's not their guy and like he's going to be the new mayor for like the next 20 years. Or the feds, when we get like a real president again, whoever that may be, Democrat or Republican, he's going to be like, fuck this. And like a new Rahm Emanuel is going to show up and like really lay the hammer down. Because I can't see this I just can't see this enduring. Okay. And there's not any, it's not like people misread it. This is not some like ghetto revolt. Like Lori Lightfoot's background also is as a cop, basically. She's Department of Justice. She's a total weirdo. Like black people don't like her. They think she's a freak. And she's got like no meaningful like connection to the city. It's not like she's like some ghetto, like it's not like she's like some crooked ghetto mayor who like, worked her way up there like by typical like Chicago dirty pool. Like she's not. She's like this weird random lady. So that's the way to look at it. And like I said, I know it sounds like there's like some big conspiratorial take. That's literally like the way Chicago works. Okay, it's not. And I know that doesn't seem possible in like the third largest city in the country, but I'm telling you, like that's what happens here. That kind of stuff.
Well, and it's interesting what you said about her not being she's a DOJ person, not a like a ghetto, like black. And I actually, that was one of the other things. I didn't realize that she was a lesbian, and she's married to a white lady, married.
I think that might be something of a work. I mean, I don't want to speculate on what people do sexually, especially somebody like Ms. Lightfoot. But
yeah, the less I can think about that, the better.
I speculate people like Lori Lightfoot, like 50 years ago, but even like 30 years ago, she'd be what's viewed as kind of like the angry spinster lady who everybody knows in their neighborhood. But now, like you pass that off as like a gay identity. I really believe that. I mean, I don't want to start some whole debate about like why male homosexuality and female homosexuality are very different things, but I think people like Lightfoot are kind of like asexual, and it's like, oh hey, by the way, like your narrative is that you're the woke gay lady, mayor. Okay, I mean, because it's not even like such interesting take. Yeah, but it seems contrived too. Because your point is like, this is Lori Lightfoot. She's a successful black woman. And she's gay. But then it was like never talked about again. But then like randomly, like supposedly her like life partner will show up with her. But then like that stopped happening again, so it's making black people mad because black people actually don't like LGBTQ at all.
Well, that's actually what I was going to bring up. And that kind of, and look, I've lived near that that population briefly, but it was a year or so. And even in those brief interactions, you realize that those two client groups of the regime do not get along well at all. And that it doesn't really fit in with the kind of I guess Obama rainbow coalition idea.
I've made the point to people: if you're like a white dude and if you really want like a black dude to attack you physically, call him like call him the FAGGOT word, and he will absolutely do that. That's even worse than calling a guy the N-word. Like, I'm not kidding. It's like that extreme. So yeah, it's really, you know how out of touch the woke are, because they have this idea that like black and Latino people like really are keen to like LGBTQ, and in reality, they're like violently hostile to it, like to the point that they will. I mean, I can't emphasize like how violently hostile they are to it. Like way more than anybody else.
Well, and it's very much what you see. So one of the kind of background, like shitlib talking points, and we can get back to Chicago after this, is this idea that there's like a war on trans people. There's this genocide, using very much kind of, Nuremberg language. And when you dig into it, and look, I realize that just pointing at a number and saying like, oh, the stats don't add up is not a particularly like useful strategy. But you look into it and you realize like, oh, this isn't essentially like a broad societal trend. It is essentially like, transvestite streetwalkers who, try to pick up a man in generally the ghetto. And then, like you said, like that, like black guys don't like that kind of stuff and react really negatively, and essentially in like in a rage, essentially, end up
hugely. And because I have to be around black people a lot. I mean, just because like places I have to go and stuff, I'm always on foot. I mean, I don't like hang out with these guys, but you know, I mean, I talk to everybody. I'm a friendly guy, you know, but you really can't even joke around with them like you do with other woods. Like, hey, you like FAG? Like that's not cool, like at all. Like they would totally not take it in a cool way. It's like it's like that extreme, you know. And it's like that's one of the ways I know that woke like don't actually hang around anybody but like really really weird like white and like Jewish people, like because if they did, they like that would not even like occur to them. And frankly, they, I mean, it's overreach anyway to like to make the trans identity like sort of like your vanguard. That's a big mistake for all kinds of reasons, and it's totally self defeating. But it's especially so because you know the kind of framing narrative is always like oppression of like the black man in America, and like you absolutely cannot lump those people together. You're going to cause outrage, and you're like primary in the ranks of the people you primarily wish to radicalize. So yeah, you're absolutely right. I've thought about that too.
So Chicago's been a political machine for a long time, and one of the things that I would consider your kind of primary contributions, you know, to the online discourse, other than the revisionism, is this kind of ethnic view of American politics. So can you describe kind of like the origins of the Chicago political regime and how that changed over the course of the 20th century, specifically when it comes to civil rights stuff, the Kennedys, things like that?
I mean, basically, the story that one of the reasons I like the film Gangs of New York, like I really, really like it, and it's not just because I like Daniel Day-Lewis a lot as an actor, and I think Leonardo DiCaprio, he's not a great actor, but he gets too much abuse from people who are kind of film snobs. But what Gangs of New York, aside from the set pieces being really dope and interesting, and the acting chops of the primary players being dope, you know, particularly Daniel Day-Lewis. It shows you like what a divided, like the North was a super divided society, but in very different ways in the South. And then the North, like the big divide, there was race problems, but it was always a sectarian divide. Okay, like quite literally. This endured until the 20th century. You know, the 1920s Klan, it was basically a sectarian grouping. Okay, way more than like, you know, neo Confederacy notions. You know, way more than, you know, saying, you know, we gotta preclude you know, a second Reconstruction regime. Like they were friendly to those things too, but that was not their main jive. Their main jive was we were being overrun by Catholic immigrants. The entire political culture is shifting. These Catholic political machines are crowding us out, us being like white prods who are not connected, like dissenters, you know, people other than the elite. You know, very much like the white working class and white poors. You know, and when we used to say white in America, we meant like white prod, like non-ethnic guy. Because we talked about ethnics by like, oh, he's a Pole, you know, he's an Irish, you know, he's Welsh, you know, he's Swedish, you know, he's German. I mean, okay, so that this is, I know Michael Jones doesn't view it that way, but he's of that population that was slated for a lot of hostility. So he's not going to like give like my tribe's takes like any kind of credibility, which is fine. But that's where some of this confusion comes from. You know, interestingly, like I said, you know, Trump's dad, he was charged with a fray, and Trump's dad got charged with a fray in the 1930s when him and like a bunch of Klan guys like fought it out with a bunch of Irish police, like NYPD guys. You know, like so like gangs in New York endured until the 20th century. And it's interesting how like media didn't run with that. It shows you kind of how like illiterate they are. They probably didn't know like what to make of it and didn't have kind of the conceptual tools available to present it in some soundbite punitive way. But in any event, you know, this Catholic Protestant divide was a very real thing. Okay, and I made the point before that one of the priorities of the New Deal regime it was kind of to deracinate people and strip them of identitarian of identitarian features altogether. You know, other than this kind of propositional identity that didn't really mean anything in historical terms. You know, that's another purpose, obviously, that was like served by the military draft and other things. But you know, the New Deal very much made war on Catholics. Okay, there's not only an E. Michael Jones conspiracy, and I made the point before that the first experiments in forced integration happened in places like the Detroit suburbs, where you had, immigrant towns that were 100%, white Polish, and a bunch of poor black folk like in desperate need of work. They'd literally be like uprooted and just like dropped in this like 100% Polish town, and said, okay, you guys are going to compete, for jobs with one another, like literally, like, hey, you and him fight, okay, and the civil rights regime obviously put the wind in the sails of that kind of ethnic cleansing effort of Catholic parish communities, because it was presented under the auspices of, we got to stop white racism, which of course doesn't make any sense. Like how some like Lithuanian immigrant community in Chicago, like what does that have to do with, like segregation in some like rural Alabama, like school district, like nothing. But that, obviously, like, that doesn't matter if you're just trying to weave like an ideological narrative and kind of create like something cohesive out of this like pastiche of very different circumstances. But Catholic political power was very much broken by the Second World War and Vatican II as well, because if you're waging war in Europe, you're waging war against the Catholic Church. It's not to say that the Catholics were all National Socialists. It's not to say that Hitler and Pope Pius were buddies. I don't think there'd be anything wrong with it if they were, but I realize I'm in the minority here. Okay, but that I'm not saying that. It's that if you're literally making war on Italy, literally making war on Germany, you're bombing France into oblivion, you are making war on the Catholic Church and its people. Okay. And of course with the whole Father Coughlin, Father Coughlin, for better or worse, he was held out as kind of the face of the American Fifth Column, way more so than somebody like Lindbergh or even Dudley Pelley, who ended up indicted. So, like, the subtext obviously was like, hey, these Catholics aren't real Americans. They're not people you can trust. And this was very, like, above board, okay? And, like I said, I know some people think that the Irish in America have, like, a victim complex. Maybe they do. I know some people suggest that the Catholics, Catholic academics, rather, Catholic people think all different ways, okay? But I know some people who claim that like Catholic partisans think Michael Jones have a conspiratorial view. I'm not going to speak to that. On this issue, they are right. Okay, they're not making it up or they're not drawing connections where they don't exist. Like this was very much a thing, and it was very much purposeful. One thing that emerged from that, like we've talked about before, is the Wallace Coalition, where when white people, Catholic and Protestant, urban and rural, like immigrant and native, got wise to what was happening, they decided that they were going to close ranks. And that's basically where you get, the Wallace, Nixon, Reagan, and now Trump coalition, the kind of permanent opposition that is like, the Republican Party. Okay. If you want to, that's what it is. That's not just some hysterical, like Mother Jones, like take on the Republican Party being a bunch of evil racists. So that's the way to understand it. And Chicago held out despite the devastation wrought on these parish communities by the civil rights movement, which was really an ethnic cleansing operation. Chicago held out a lot longer than most cities. Part of that's because Chicago is essential, just because it's literally the center of the continental United States. Chicago is a port city because the Great Lakes are a third coast in terms of commerce. Like it literally is this day, which seems weird to people, but the Great Lakes are so vast, it literally is like an inland ocean. Okay, and there still is a ton of like freshwater commerce on the Great Lakes. High finance is, especially commodities, is huge in Chicago. So Chicago couldn't just be allowed to totally, completely go to hell. Okay, so that's part of it. Part of it is that where the machine ended and the outfit began was never really clear. And despite, one of the reasons I always refer people to the movie Thief, by Michael Mann, that really is what Chicago was like in the 80s. And I'm old enough to remember that. I mean, I was a kid, but like the outfit wasn't the mafia in the sense of it wasn't a bunch of Italian guys burning Saints cards and thinking about, their grandfathers who founded the Black Hand and all this like weird stuff. Like, yeah, the core of the outfit was in the Patch, which is Grant and Ogden. And it was Italian dudes like Joey Lombardo who kind of constituted like upper management, but it wasn't the mafia. like you could be any race and be in the outfit as an associate, and like they didn't have like formally made men or anything like that, and like the way it came about, it could only come about in a place that was run like Chicago was by like political bosses, you know, and with like institutionalized ward corruption, and you know with kind of the tacit consent of the police, you know, utilizing it as like a way of literally imposing a kind of government on crime. Like this sounds like something from Marvel Comics. That's literally what the outfit was. That's why it's the outfit. It's not La Cosa Nostra. It's not the mafia. Like that's why people think I'm being like a pedantic fuck. You know, like I'll talk to some guy from like Manhattan or like some English guy. I'll be like, "It's the Chicago branch of La Cosa Nostra." I'll be like, "Bro, it does not fucking exist. Like it doesn't. There's no such thing." You know, but that's part of it too. And like there is no outfit anymore. Like there's not. Okay, like people on the internet don't believe me about that. But it's like you go to Richard's bar, yeah, you will see dudes who like there's always like FBI surveillance on that fucking place. I'm not gonna name their names, and there are dudes there who are like dangerous people, and there are like Italian guys who like run with like armed robbery gangs. But there's like a million ethnic gangs in Chicago, so like some of them are like Italian dudes. Like so what? That's not the same thing at all. You know, like when the outfit reigned, like literally, like you'd go to court, the cops would take you to American Bonding, which was outfit run. They'd get a kickback. American Bonding would put you on a juice loan, you know, which was, you know, a fucking outfit loan. You'd go before a judge. Your lawyer would ask the judge, like, how much it's going to cost me to go away. You know, the judge would be like $5,000 or $10,000. You drop a bag of money on that judge in chambers, and then like your indictment would go away. You know, and then you're on the hook to like pay the outfit for like what they paid to bond you out. Like it's literally how it worked. You know, like nothing like that would be possible today for all kinds of reasons.
So two things. First, a little bit of housekeeping. Thomas, I think that your Telegram is open, and so I'm hearing notifications on my end.
Shit, I'm sorry, man.
Yeah, no worries. I just wanted to get that before I get 1,000 comments about it.
Yeah.
The moment this goes live. But the other part is that, so one of the classic things in economics, right? And I have an economics background, is the idea that you know, monopolies reduce efficiency of production. And so when that's something that you want, you know, like, I don't know, widgets or cars or something, a monopoly is bad, right? It reduces the amount of, you know, widgets or cars that can be produced. It drives up the cost. But there's another competing idea that essentially, like, you want, to a certain degree, a monopoly on crime because it reduces crime. And so the classic example is kind of, you know, Japanese mafia, the Yakuza, who have kind of a, at least a,
that's
you
more
know,
like the outfit
theory,
that's more like the outfit than the East Coast Mafia, definitely.
Right, exactly. The idea is that, well, if all crime goes through one group, there will be less crime. It's a monopoly, right? And there will be less violent crime because essentially they know that if it gets too out of hand, you know, it comes down on their head. So have you seen, as kind of the outfit disintegrated, you know, due to, you know, the actions of the FBI and, you know, some other, you know, stuff that happened kind of, you know, in the 50s through 70s, do you think that's kind of the reason that Chicago has gotten, you know, so dramatically violent, or do you think there's something else going on?
I mean, Chicago's an evil place. And I say this as a dude. I mean, I'm neither romanticizing this nor making a martyr myself, like some guy, you know, who goes before some fucking congregation and confesses his sins, but I grew up in about like the richest part of the Chicago suburbs you can. I've also like had a habit and been homeless on the west side, okay? I've also literally seen people be fucking murdered at a distance, okay? I mean, thank God not people I know, but I've got a unique perspective on this town. It is an evil place. There's something wrong here, okay? And when I hear guys, I assume it's dudes who aren't really from here, but when they talk about like, yeah, you know, the outfit kept things in check. The outfit were savages, man. Like nobody wanted to be like the outfit. It's not like John Gotti in his Brioni suits and, you know, or you know, Frank Locascio with like two like models on his arms. Like these guys were fucking animals. You know, they really were, man. Like they'd skin people alive. They'd put people on meat hooks. They'd torture people with blowtorches. Like until around the early 90s, like every few months, there'd be dead bodies that would pop up in Bensonville, like in the O'Hare Airport parking lot, and they'd have signs like severe torture on them. You know, it's like in Thief, where, I mean, I'm not going to repeat, Robert Prosky was supposed to be Joey Aiupa when he's threatening James Caan, and he shows him his dead friend, and he's like, "Who the fuck do you think you are?" And he was like, "I'll put your wife out on the street. I'll have her get rammed in the by N-words. Then I'll cut your fucking family into whammy burgers. Motherfuckers are gonna be eating them and not even know they're eating them. What do you think about that, motherfucker? Like that's literally like what these guys were about. Like that's not cool or like romantic or like badass. It's just like sick. It's just disgusting, man. And like there's something. Obviously something. Obviously something other than the fact that like my dad is still here about half the time, like keeps me here because I keep coming back here. Like it's not all bad, but there is like a certain darkness here, and like places become corrupted by the past, not because of like some kind of mysticism or ghostly phantasmic occurrences, like bad auras or something. But sociology is weird, man. Okay, and like. And the way there's such a thing as epigenetic memory. Okay, there's also like certain things just like resonant. Okay, that's why do you think all human identitarian structures like rely so much on the past? It's not just ancestor worship, and it's not just a way of like literally like finding pole stars within which to orient oneself relative to his fellow man and things and human affairs therein. There's like something to this. There's like something that lives like about freaking history, and there's something very evil here.
Well, and that's something.
No, go ahead. I'm listening.
I very much know what you mean, because there are kind of in most American cities of a significant size, they do have kind of and look, I'm not trying to get all kind of, I guess, like airy about it, but there is kind of a spirit to certain American cities. Like if you've been to DC, DC has a spirit to it, and it's not a good one. There's something gross about it. And look, there's certain cities that have, kind of a soul to them. I've never spent, much time in Chicago, but the one I felt it is New Orleans. Like New Orleans has, and it's not the same. It has its own kind of aura and feel to it.
Oh,
and specifically in kind of older cities, they build up like a culture and a mythos that almost affects everyone who lives there. And I think that some cities kind of shed it. Like there's certain parts of New York that aren't New York anymore. They're kind of just big city. But from what it sounds like Chicago has that. I know Baltimore has that.
Oh yeah, Baltimore is a tough place, man. Like I got on there okay. Thankfully I wasn't like ripping and running or like being an idiot and abusing drugs or something. But I felt at ease there in like ways that I would not have had I not, had my experiences here. Because it's those East Coast towns like Baltimore, like they're like Chicago in a basic way. They're different, but it's more like here than anywhere else, and vice versa.
So,
but
I'm curious, right? And I realize all the Euros are saying like, how old is a 300-year-old town? But Chicago has a different history to a lot of other, big American cities, because it was kind of a frontier town, correct? How do you think that affected the development of the city?
In a big way, and there's a lot of there's a lot of like there's a lot of like complex political and war fighting history between like the Indian nations and things. The Black Hawk War, which wasn't actually a war and that there weren't any casualties, but that's like Lincoln spent his time in uniform in the Black Hawk War, and that was kind of the last major impactful occurrence relating to that population. But that's a big part of it. But it's also like Chicago's weird. Like my dad and I were talking about this morning. When he gave me a lift where I had to go. People from like Manhattan and LA, they think Chicago's weird and square because weird is like and much of a gremlin as Lightfoot is. Like people in Chicago, like even like white liberals, were like they're viewed as like uptight. People don't like. You don't really see, unless it's like Halloween night or unless you're at some like, kind of skeezy nightclub, you don't see like women showing a lot of skin. Like you don't see people like engage in PDA. Like you don't see like, homeless people like aggressively shaking people down because like somebody's going to whoop their ass or the police are just going to like take care of it. And there's not like, there was no proper red light district in Chicago. It seems crazy and I'm dating myself here, before like, before like internet porn, it was like unthinkable that pornography would be ubiquitous. But you'd go to Los Angeles, you know, in Hollywood, there would be literally like a strip full of like vice and like anything you want. You know, like New York had its like peep show booths and stuff. Like Chicago had Rush Street, but it was these guys were constantly shaken down by the cops, and it wasn't like popular red light district. Like if you wanted to like find like a hooker or something, you'd have to like basically have to like go to the right bars, hang around, and it was like very much like below deck. Okay, I mean, so there's always Chicago's always been kind of square on the one hand in those terms, and even people dress. It's hard to place like the time period. I mean, I'm like a weirdo, so I guess I couldn't really exist anywhere in the 21st century if you look at me. But like most people in Chicago, other than the fact that nobody flies gang colors anymore, like in ways that can be picked up by neutrons or by the police. But other than that, it's like it could be the 80s, it could be the early 2000s, it could be 1995. It's weird, man. And but that's just that kind of provincialism. And Irvine Wells said that Chicago was the most segregated place it's ever been, other than Belfast. And there's something to that. In the bad old days, they said to disembark at Pulaski Street, and I'd always wear a hoodie and tie my hair up because a few times, like it was obvious I was white when I disembarked. Like immediately, like Chicago police would roll up and be like, "What the fuck are you doing here?" Like that's code for like, "What are you doing here, white man?" And I mean, it cuts both ways, Like if some like hood rat dude who obviously was on the hustle, like showing Wicker Park, they'd frame it differently, but it'd be like the same deal. And that I guarantee you that does not happen like in New York, okay? These days, okay? I'm not talking 30 freaking years ago. But so juxtaposed with the kind of provincial goofiness people would probably identify it as punitively, Chicago's friggin' man. I mean, stuff gets like stuff jumps off here, man. It's not just like hype or like or hood guys or like wannabe hood guys like trying to like talk tough and things like that. I mean, it's real shit, man. Like this is not a place where you want to play games, and it's not a place where people want to glorify the street. Some people do. I find that incredible because there's nothing cool about it, and there's not even a mystique about it. Like like the New York has the mafia, and Los Angeles has like outlaw culture, and and kind of you got beautiful women, you got Hollywood, you got cocaine, but you also got like South Central, and like these buffed up gangsters and stuff like that. Like Chicago, like that, man. Like Chicago is some like giggling psychopath and like a dirty flannel like coming up behind you and friggin' emptying a magazine into the back of your head, like when you're standing in front of a church or something, and like you fall on your face like on a pile of dirty needles and like used condoms. You know what I mean? Like there's nothing like cool about it or like badass or like
So your line about Chicago being the most segregated place in the world next to Belfast. So that's a little bit of I guess personal anecdote. I've mentioned a few times on the channel that my fiance's family is Swedish, and
that's awesome.
dating a Americanized Swede is kind of the best of both worlds because you get to date someone who looks Swedish but doesn't sound Swedish.
No, go look it up, man. Like that's I'm not being crass. I mean, that's
not kind to the English language. But it's interesting because her grandparents grew up, and they still are, in what would have been these kind of ethnic enclaves in Chicago, right?
Yeah,
like
Andersonville,
Chicago, exactly.
The second Swedish flag on the freaking water tower
there. Yeah, exactly. It's odd because they kind of speak about those days with rose tinted glasses. Everyone knew everyone. Everyone was related to a certain degree, and there's an immense degree of kind of ethnic solidarity there. But at the same time, my fiance's grandparents are essentially communists, and it's not really that they started out that way. It seems that they kind of lived most of their lives as Eisenhower Republicans, log cabin Republican types. But through kind of the civil rights regime and kind of the corruption of these mainline ethnic churches. A group like the Swedish Covenant Church, which essentially is I don't know if it's officially the national church of Sweden, but it's at very least very close to it, right? Deliberately.
Yeah, and I'm not going to be disrespectful to people, but yeah, they do not do good things.
Right. No, exactly. And now, you look at, and this, elderly woman almost in her 90s is handing me pamphlets for, obese, Black lesbians, talking about like, the oppression of the white man, or, essentially, and how, the Swedes are somehow to be held responsible for kind of like the antebellum South, which look like I don't really have a dog in this fight past a certain point, but I'm very confident that someone who got here in 1900 can't really be blamed for something.
Well, what's really weird, and I mean, it's like my dad, my dad's a really well-traveled dude, and he spent a lot of time in Norway. Like I was actually conceived in Norway, which I think is kind of funny. But there's a whole story behind that like my dad has told me. He didn't like tell me this as an adult, obviously, but it's funny. But in any event, like my dad hates the Swedes. Like this dates to like Vietnam and stuff. But there's like a weird, like Gunnar Myrdal. He was kind of the Goyish prince of these radical guys, like these like radical Jewish guys who were kind of behind the NAACP in the early days. And Brown v. Board was basically a Gunnar Myrdal like sociological paper, like that was very much couched in Franz Boas and like Lysenko's thought. But there's something massively random about Swedes deciding to pretend to care about the stuff they pretend to care about. Like it's not like it's different than like Latino people from like Nicaragua and from kind of the Panama Canal zone generally, like having this kind of Catholic social teaching take that dovetails with like Sandinista kind of communism. Like that makes sense in a way. Like, okay, you're from a Scandinavian country that basically after Charles XII lost to the Russians has had like absolutely no role in power politics, but you're pretending to care about random like black people thousands of miles from where you live. Like why? It's very, very, very weird. And yeah.
I will say through kind of my interactions with the Longhouse guys, who are a group of Scandies with the podcast, I have a bizarrely Nordic audience. Like it's something like 20% of my audience is Nordic, and
a lot of Norwegian guys are right wing. Like,
yes, they are.
Yeah.
Yes, and so it's been interesting interacting with them. And so my point was not necessarily to disparage Swedes generally, although that's that's something to get into. Yeah. But what it's interesting, and I specifically wanted to address that, the people who are the product of that extreme segregation, on one hand, look back on their childhood with rose-tinted glasses. It was idyllic to a certain degree. It was incredibly safe. Everyone knew everyone. It was the kind of thing where you couldn't do anything because there were half dozen old grandmothers on the street who, if you did something, if you stole something from a store, they'd tell your parents and you get your ass beat when you got home. That kind of like ethnic solidarity, and kind of hold that to a certain degree in reverence, right? They look at that as a positive thing, but have been so kind of completely subverted by like the kind of respectable NPR culture, if you want to say it, that they've been essentially forced to kind of turn against their own upbringing, and specifically their own upbringing within the kind of like ethnic structure of Chicago.
What's also especially weird because a lot of the Swedes, because Swedes are industrious people, that goes without saying, and they made it out. White Chicago, man, was even dudes of my generation who had to grow up there in places like Uptown. Uptown was you had a bunch of Appalachian refugees who arrived there like as late as the 50s. That's why there was an Uptown set, the Uptown Rebels, and like their gang sweaters literally had the battle flag, the bloodstained banner, and they were like a white power set, but they were like pushing crack. Like it's crazy, but. They were a bunch of Appalachian hillbilly kids, and I mean these guys lived as bad or worse than like the black folks in the towers at places like Cabrini Green. Like these people lived like freaking animals. Like I'm not saying that to say like mean things about them, but it was like that bad. And this was into like the 70s and 80s. Like there's a whole documentary on Uptown, and it looks like freaking Beirut. And this is in like 1980. You can find it on YouTube. And there's these little like tow-haired kids, like with dirty faces, like white kids who are like, their parents are like drunks on welfare, or they're not there at all. They're like literally like street kids. I mean, it's not like white Chicago is not like some cities in the Western world where it's like, oh, we remember white poverty, but this was, back in the 1870s. Like guys my age and a little younger like remember this. Like, thank God I grew up like with everything I needed. You know, like I wasn't a poor kid. I grew up in the North Shore, but I, you know, I would regularly pass through white hoods that were like blighted. Okay, like so if you're like an Andersonville Swede, yeah, I'm hip to the fact that these people, you know, took on this kind of sense of like, you know, well, are we really worthy because we got out of those conditions? But it's like, look, man, it's like you know about white poverty if you're from there, and it's like, you know, you weren't living in a place where like you and your neighbors like had these like great lives and 2-car garages. Then they're like these black people who didn't have shit. It's like you were as badly off as they were. So it's just weird, man. It's a weird dynamic. And that's one of the reasons why people went nuts when like Martin Luther King like pulled that shit here, man. Like, you're not fucking doing that here. And plus, I mean, they were perfectly affronted. They're like, he's trying to, you know, break up our parish community, and we're under attack. You know, it's like who's this rich black man with manicured fingernails and a fancy suit on and a gold watch, like talking about he's got it bad. You know, these were immigrants and friggin' poor white trash who didn't have shit, man. You know, like literally.
See, I'm glad you brought up his manicured fingernails, because I'm glad that I'm not the only person who's noticed that he has fingernails like a woman, and it is odd to notice.
Martin Luther King was a guy. He was kind of. I'm not saying this to be mean or put shade on black folk. He was a caricature. He was like a caricature that kind of like most negative, kind of pimpish, like reverend on the hustle. You know, can't keep it in his pants. You know, is kind of like a thug. You know, like when he's not, you know, around the white folks. And I mean, this is like a real thing. Okay, like it's a real type. Like, he was not an attractive guy. You know, like he was basically yeah, he was like some pimp type hood rat, you know, like preacher. And
that's kind of an archetype. So one of the other,
but in this case it was fake too. It's not what the hell was he doing for black folks? He was like the acceptable black man in the front office, basically telling black people like, you know, whatever you do, don't ever revolt. You know, just rest assured, like however you're being exploited and used, you know, it's because like people, your betters are, you know, trying to articulate a paradigm of social justice that you can't really understand. I mean, like, what the fuck is that? You know? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, it's interesting that one of my other, you know, recent obsessions was Jonestown. Like the summer before I started this podcast, I went on a real deep dive on Jonestown.
It's very weird.
It is really weird. And Jim Jones was an interesting character, but you realize that there's kind of a archetype in America of, you know, the hustler preacher that goes back a long time. And it's very much in many ways, a Southern tradition, right? Like they were kind of the snake handlers, you know, this whole like traveling revival circuit. And through kind of the Great Migration, when you saw, you know, black folks move up north for, you know, a variety of reasons, they kind of took that tradition with them. And not to say that there weren't always religious hucksters in, you know, the northern half of the country, but it was kind of a different variety. And so
no, definitely
MLK kind of is in that tradition of, you know, like the traveling revival circuit.
Definitely.
And you hear it in the way he speaks as well. You know, it's very much like a busker. You know, you'd imagine him talking like that at a carnival.
Well, yeah, and it's weird. He was a weird, like, I mean, I don't want to digress, and I don't want to sound like a paranoiac, but the murder of Martin Luther King is incredibly weird, and it's way, way, way weirder than the JFK murder, which actually isn't weird. It's like it's boomer truth to claim that it is. But Martin Luther King, had he lived, he would have had real problems, and he would have gone down in flames, in my opinion.
Well, he was already in trouble by the time he was shot. Like he had fallen out of favor. His organization was dwindling. He was suffering financial issues.
So murdering him, especially at that point, didn't make a lot of sense. But part of the myth is, I get it, is the fact that, you know, he was a martyred figure. But it was weird. It was weird anyway that he was the guy they chose. Like, my dad actually made that point, and I mean, my dad's very much like an old school like white Protestant dude, like Cold Warrior, like pre-boomer. But he made the point, because I asked him one time, I'm like, you know, what was your take? Because my dad was like an Okie, grew up in a white ghetto in West Hollywood back when that was like a white and Hispanic ghetto. But you know, I asked him, he was at Fort Benning, Georgia, which had real race problems, you know, like in 1968, like when King got killed. And I'm like, what was like your take on Martin Luther King? And my dad's like, honestly, he's like myself, and he's like white man like myself, you know, he's like of my kind of like class and stage at that time. He's like, we viewed him the way like guys your age viewed like Jesse Jackson. He was just kind of this black guy in the make that the man likes because he's, basically telling his co-eds to behave themselves and not make trouble, and he's getting very rich doing it. My dad's like this idea of like, and he's like, even white people kind of supported that endeavor. Like nobody fawned over him. Like this man is like the greatest orator of all time. Like nobody pretended he was like Clarence Darrow or that he was like this incredible man. It was kind of like, well, he's doing God's work because we're not going to have a race war in, the street in Chicago or Philly. So, hey, that's good. We like MLK. But like acting like he's like the greatest man ever lived, that's very weird. And aside from like his moral indiscretions, it's like Churchill. Like Churchill was like a guy who he'd mumble his way through these like cringe like platitudes, about how he's a good guy and Germans are bad guys and we're gonna fight to the end. I mean, like that's like a high school football coach in some shitty town sort of rhetoric. Like why is that incredible and awesome? It's really, really underwhelming, and it's very, very much partakes of hucksterism, definitely.
Well, they're kind of, and I would argue that the equivalence between Churchill and MLK is kind of a useful one, because they're both kind of saints of, whatever you want to call it, the Nuremberg regime.
Oh,
right?
yeah,
They were essential to kind of like mending, kind of a tear in the narrative. And so to me, one of the projects I've been slowly working on in the background, and really I just need to work more, is essentially a kind of a book on MLK for kind of the normie conservative. Because I get so tired of seeing this man trotted out as an example of like, well, if we just went back to MLK, everything would be fine. And look, I use that voice because that's a real person, and I have a degree of affection for this person. But I see so many people who are kind of our ideological co-compatriots, in kind of a different world would be, kind of marching alongside you and I. We're kind of handicapped and kind of taken out at the knee by their allegiance to these figures like Churchill and like MLK. It's almost been kind of, they've accepted their enemies' framing and they've accepted their enemies' premises, and they wonder why they're essentially left with, no weapon to hand when a real confrontation happens.
No, exactly. Of course. And that's incredibly insidious. And I emphasize that point too, as you know, but it's also even taking the political question out of it. By political, I mean the friend-enemy paradigm. I don't mean political in general definitional terms. A guy like Martin Luther King coming out and saying, in this kind of like faux soaring language that he wants everyone to get along with each other. That's not the way reality is. Like human beings are complicated. And racial identity is complicated. And when races collide, there's always good things that happen and very catastrophic things that happen. Like you can't just declare that these incredibly problematic human affairs like race relations can be resolved if like this like nice man says something that might make kindergartners like drink their juice box and be quiet and behave. Like that's not how life is. Like my dad used to talk about during the Cold War, how he tried to educate people about why things were dangerous and why strategic balance was something that was basically trying to control like a wild Mustang by throwing a bridle on it. It's not a question of like, well, but Mr. Reagan just needs to stop saying mean things to the Soviet Union, and Mr. Andropov just needs to stop building nuclear missiles. Like that's not. It's like you don't understand the technology is its own momentum, and the very existence of this thing is a human decision making gradually it's removed from the equation. And before you know it's underway, when you're talking about human societies at scale, you're at war before you even know it. And then it's like, okay, I have a 5-minute window to decide if I kill 80 million Russians or not. And if I don't, we're all going to be dead. Like, what do? You can't reduce this to platitudes. So that's like what I really resent. Like I don't demand everybody agree with me on things, just because that would be obtuse. But you can't just say that, like, you can't just like dismiss. You can't dismiss things like, like war and peace and relations between the races, by like appealing to some like moral platitude. That's not how things work. And like how's that constructive? It's basically.
I completely agree. And there's this kind of, and I think if we can draw a distinction in the right between those who have kind of a conservative and a reactionary temperament. So I'll use my roommate again as an example because we're a useful kind of version of that split. Sure. Both of us are kind of on the right by temperament, however you want to break that down. But he is very much, and this is, not a, not a criticism. He is a conservative person. He wants things to kind of, stay the same and stay functional, and, doesn't want to rock the boat, which for the vast majority of human history was an understandable, was an understandable position, right?
Yeah.
But there's something to be said for the fact that, look, going back to, MLK, going back to kind of like the 80s consensus on race, that not only did that never work, it led us here. And simply the idea that we can roll the boulder back up the hill 30 years and just hold it there, that's not only not how the dialectic works. You can't go back. There is a synthesis of positions. But if it degraded this quickly to a situation that kind of, regardless on your, prescriptive, that no one looks at race relations in the U.S. now and says things are going well, right? No one is like, oh, well, this is exactly what we want to happen. And so the idea that, and I realize we've gotten fully and totally away from talking about Chicago, but the idea that essentially,
the things are related. But yeah.
They are, yes. The idea that we can essentially just, essentially hit the rewind button, and if we just believed in Saint MLK extra hard, it would fix all our problems, I think is laughable. And it's too easy for people who are kind of outside of the mainstream dialogue to forget that very much is the position held by kind of like the normie, regular Republican American.
No, and one of the reasons I emphasize what's dysfunctional and pathological about the progressive ideology, I don't just draw the parallels, like the literal parallels, like the above board, like spoken allegiances between the New Deal and the Soviet Union, and Stalin specifically. Quite literally, the progressive view is that, government is an end in itself. Basic human characteristics are inconvenient and shouldn't exist because they make it harder for man to be governed. And we've got to do everything in our power, no matter how harmful it is to human psychology, severally and collectively, no matter how detrimental it is to culture, no matter how, meaningless it renders life, no matter how much it penalizes people, in entire, categories of people, ethnic, socioeconomic, what have you. We just have to, eradicate human characteristics that make it difficult to govern people. And if you think that way, that's literally insane. And that's perverted as fuck. Governments aren't some end in themselves. Government exists to, guarantee the posterity. First and foremost, it exists to guarantee the posterity of a people. Okay? If it's not doing that, it is failing abjectly. Beyond that, it basically can do things like, guard certain traditions. In times of war, obviously, you want, some kind of public authority to be responsible for mobilization. But beyond that, and I'm not some libertarian, but government really isn't structured to do much. It's not going to, improve the way men and women relate. It's not going to, make black and white people, trust each other more. It's not going to, teach little kids about sex. It's not going to, bring up the test scores of Hispanic kids. Even if regardless of whether you think those are good, laudable things or not, government's not capable of that. It's like saying, I want to build a great building. I'm gonna have a bunch of policemen stand around, and after a while, a great building will be built. It's those aren't the resources you draw upon for that objective. That's not what governments do. Governments don't educate your kids or make men and women get along better, or increase understandings between races. That's not what they do. They're not capable of doing that.
Well, and I think that one of the kind of the core insights from, your and my confessional history is essentially that there is human nature is constant. And, regardless of how you want to describe it, kind of corruption is inherent to the human tradition. And you can't legislate away humans doing bad things. Obviously, you can negate, those to a certain effect. Obviously, I'm not saying, let murderers free on the street. But I think that kind of the core corruption in, whatever we want to call progressivism with a capital P, is that idea that, man can be remade, that we can essentially through law, make a man who won't sin, make a man who won't cheat, who won't lie.
Oh, definitely.
And they're really willing to essentially in that kind of utopian goal, they're willing to tear down anything associated with, the previous order.
That's kind of what I'm devoting my science fiction to. I mean, I don't think I'm spoiling the plot, but I think it's obvious to people who follow it. The whole pretext of it, the framing device is World War III if the Able Archer era came to a nuclear war. But in the distant future, there's just in some ways very horrible, nightmarish, in some ways very advanced, like space-faring society. But there's essentially like a military dictator in the form of LeMay Alexis Huber. And he creates the Zartax program, not because it's essential to, find better ways to wage war, by combining, human cunning and intellect with machine prowess for killing. But he's looking for a way that his consciousness can be transposed indefinitely into like artificial vessels, because society became pointless before War Day, and it's still pointless in the future. I mean, among these people, because they're godless and they're evil. But that's like the entire ambition of like this ruling coterie is like we're going to become immortal, and we have the technology to do it, and we're going to sell it to people. We're going to sell a constant state of war to people, so the technology is always at hand. And I'm just like definitely going to be this, like immortal, like killer saint, like nightmare creature. But that's the kind of stuff that would emerge if the technology was available and you actually had like an imaginative like ruling caste. Because all modern ideologies, other than the one that was defeated on May 8th, 1945, they create pointless societies. Like even if they worked, like you're looking at you're either looking at like a luxurious jail or a nursing home is like the ideal. Like people sit around like doing pointless things, and the metric of success or prosperity is, an abundance of food and recreational activities. And people sit around literally waiting to die while consuming this food and engaging in these activities. I mean, I realized I was like a bit heavy for what we're talking about, but
no, not at all. So we're approaching on time, Thomas. So you've mentioned your sci-fi, and I know that Steel Storm 2 is coming out. But is there anything you want to plug before we wrap this up?
No, not really. And yeah, I really appreciate you hosting me, and we'll talk again very soon. Just check out the Substack. I do have a presence on Twitter again. It's kind of low key because it just is, and I don't like Twitter, man, but I really like the people there who seek me out. I really do. They're great. But because I do have some things going on, I wanted to utilize Twitter at least to promote those things. But I'm gonna leave it to other people for now to promote that Twitter account. But if you look for it, you will find. Seeking, you shall find, I think. And I want to apologize for the delay in launching my YouTube channel. I had some. It's kind of sad personal events last weekend. I mean, I'm fine, but just like life stuff that as we age happens. And I felt really sick, so that launch didn't happen. But it is underway. I promise. I got a bunch of new hardware. I'm getting it together. But so please don't disdain the fact I've not done it yet. But otherwise, my Substack, real Thomas777.substack.com. Check me out here. You and I have a fair amount of content now, man, like on your channel, and that's dope.
Yeah, we do. I think this is our 6th interview. So
it's great, man.
Amount of content here.
Yeah, and I'm gonna upload these when I do get the channel up and running, if you're okay with that.
Oh yeah, sure. I'll be happy to send them over to you.
Yeah, hell yeah. And I'm appearing with Academic Agent on a stream in a couple of weeks, and I'll drop a formal announcement on that. But yeah, I'll basically check the Tgram, t.me/the777. Like Tgram's kind of like where I like announce stuff, and that's where kind of like the people I'm tightest with, we interact without filter. So that's the best way to kind of get hip to like me announcing things. And I haven't decided yet. I may hit up the Amwin conference. I think that might shake things up. And if people want to go, I'm going to decide by Saturday. But I'd be more inclined to go if people like want to go, and we can show up like mob deep. Like I'm serious. So if you want to do that, like hit me up like by text or like DM or on Tgram or something, and like let me know. But that's all I got.
All right, and I'll have the links to everything you mentioned, Thomas, in the description of this video. This episode is actually going live tonight after my appearance on Academic Agent's channel.
Oh yeah, I'll hype that, man. Like I forgot that it's tonight. Yeah, thanks for reminding me. I'll hype that on my platforms.
I'm going to be appearing with George Bagby, who's been on my channel a few times.
He's great, man. He's on my Tgram. He's an awesome guy.
Yeah, he is. I owe him a lot. He was actually my, and I've mentioned it a few times on the channel before, but he was my my high school history teacher.
Oh no! What? Yeah. He reached out to me and told me that, man. Like, Yeah, no, he's a good dude, man, and I'm glad it's dope that there's still freaking teachers like that around. Like that's being real, not just polite. Like
Oh yeah, no, it is a he is the reason I'm here, and it's a miracle he was able to get away with what he did.
No, he's an awesome guy, man. Yeah, I'm stoked that I'm definitely gonna tune in. And I'm gonna hype it on my platforms. And
well, thank you, Thomas.
Thank you, man.
And then as far as my links, this will, you guys know the deal. My links will be down in the description. This episode will be on YouTube, same as normal, and also all episodes of the Jay Burden Show. The numbered episodes appear on Apple, Spotify, anywhere you listen to audio only shows. After that, after the first 10 episodes, that is, they do go behind a paywall on my Substack. That's just a little bit of a way for me to fund the channel. They will always be free on the YouTube channel as long as Susan allows me on the platform. I've also recently launched a Subscribe Star, which is a way for you guys to essentially, support the channel if you'd like to. We're actually getting some surprising traction already on that. And I don't require it by any means, but I do appreciate it just to kind of cover the costs of, being on the internet. And other than that, I think we're done. Thank you again for appearing, Thomas. And remember, guys, keep your head up. The lie can't last forever. Good night.